I wanted to do just a brief review of least restrictive environment before we dig into the rest of the case study. Hopefully you've taken a look at the summary and the chart. You've used my work, worked on those 5 yellow sections, and started your assignment at this point. Again, you can copy and paste my charts with your added pieces in and use that for your assignment. Let's talk about least restrictive environment in very large concept way before we dig in. I want to tell you a little bit about the where and the how of least restrictive environment. Many people, including myself, kind of assume that least restrictive environment is the where we educate students. It's far more complicated than that. Least restrictive environment in the law does tell us where we need to educate students, and that is that students with disabilities receive their education alongside their peers without disabilities, which leads us to their gen ed grade level classroom. That's kind of the baseline for least restrictive environment. But there's a second piece. We need to make sure they're not removed from that gen ed grade level classroom unless learning cannot be achieved even with the use of supplementary aids and services. That digs into the how. You can't just consider the where. That would mean that even our students with the most intensive needs that are in 10th grade might be in a 10th grade chemistry classroom. That's not always appropriate, and we know that, which is why we have a continuum of services for students of all needs. But when you think about not removing students from their gen ed classrooms unless learning cannot be achieved, even with the use of supplementary aids and services, we need to dig into what those supplementary aids and services are. And our law states that supplementary aids and services should mean that the student can make progress toward identified academic or functional annual goals. That's what we've identified in their IEP. But be also on top of that, be involved and make progress in the gen ed curriculum, as well as participating in extracurricular activities and take part in these activities with students that both do have disabilities and don't have disabilities. That kind of opens the door to 2 things, in my opinion, an interpretation of the law. One, we need to max out IEPs before we remove students from where their peers are. And that simply means that a student with more intensive needs and maybe just resource 30 minutes a week, before considering moving them outside of their gen ed classroom, we need to write in more supports, more modifications, more visual supports, more intensive UDL, MTSS level 3, more supports that are available to all students, but also this student's unique needs before considering removing them. We need to have that data that those supports are in place and not enough. Secondly, it really opens the door to what I call creative inclusion. We have students with really intense needs that are in their neighborhood middle school and high schools, where maybe the academic pieces aren't appropriate, but our specials classes, extracurricular activities, things that occur before and after school at lunchtime during seminars are far more appropriate and where their functional skills can be embedded. So, for example, if you have a student with a really intensive needs that needs complete modification for academics, there are other goals they could be working on in other ways in social environments with their peers. Getting really creative and thinking about inclusive practices and maxing out that IEP before automatically removing them from where their peers are. That's just a brief introduction to LRE, and we're going to dig into the laws and existing regulations in just a few slides.